BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Hope everyone had a good weekend. On Mondays I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Last week on the channel, I devoted a very large segment of the Zodiac Killer news report to discussing a proposed solution to the Zodiac Killer Z32 cipher by Adam Ivester, and even though I was extremely critical of that one, he made a follow-up response called "There Are No Children in the Area," where he is standing by all of his claims. Then he is standing by his proposed solution to the Zodiac Killer Z32 cipher, which begins with RSVP My Blast. We can just call that the My Blast proposal. And I thought about one thing, and you guys can challenge me on this if you want, because what Adam is saying is that the word blast is used in almost a metaphorical way for the word party. And when he said this in his video, I didn't think twice about it. However, when I was thinking more about how we use the word blast in the English language, I mean, even in this video, "There Are No Children in the Area," he brings up numerous cards that say "have a blast." But having a blast means having a good time. We would more say that the word bash is a party. And I mean, is this something where Adam is misunderstanding the words? When I heard it the first time, I mean, I completely connected the dots. Yes, a blast is a party, but I mean, people have like a summer blast and so on, but the word blast refers to a good time, and the word bash refers to a party. And that might sound like it's almost hair-splitting, but I just wanted to share something with you guys about what I was thinking. And in other news, there are multiple live streams that are available on the channel New Cokes 2024, run by Vincent McConnell. And there was one where he interviewed an individual named Zach Wilcox, whom I've referred to as Zach M in the past. I guess I can share his name that he uses publicly, Zach Menace. And Zach Wilcox was interviewed by Vincent McConnell of the New Cokes channel, talking all about the Zodiac Killer suspect, Dale Hill. Because the Zodiac was an unidentified serial killer, people are working tirelessly to try and solve the case and identify the Zodiac. And two people are a husband and wife research team that is comprised of Jeff Thornton and Melissa Rose Tappa. And they believe that Jeff's grandfather, Dale Hill, was the Zodiac Killer. And you can find a full discussion on this also on Vincent's channel under the name Dale Hill Was Not the Zodiac. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is somewhat multifaceted, because I've been very, very open-minded when it comes to listening to new suspect profiles. I've been very open-minded when people have been proposing suspects that are out of the ordinary. But when it comes to certain aspects of the internet culture, for lack of a better term, I try to stay away from them, such as anything involving trash talk or gossip or drama. And I've made many public statements about Dale Hill. I have multiple episodes about him here on Black Box Online Radio, which I invite you to listen to. I've interviewed Jeff and Melissa multiple times, and I've also participated in their Facebook group, which is called The Zodiac Killer and Me. And they've been under a lot of pressure recently because of people challenging their claims. However, the reason why I wanted to do this is because of something that Vincent discussed in his live stream, and that is, he was accusing Jeff Thornton directly of trying to cook AI, to cook meta AI, by feeding it information about his Zodiac Killer suspect, so that when other people would be looking at the Zodiac Killer case, or they would be trying to use AI to ask questions about the Zodiac Killer, it would come back and say that Dale Hill was the Zodiac, and he's trying to raise awareness and publicity of his suspect, and I don't think that's a good thing. And this is one where I would be on Vincent's side, and this is one where I would take a stance that you should not be trying to cook AI. You should be letting the evidence speak for itself. You don't need to publicize your suspect in this way by using deceptive tactics, by trying to get AI to say something that is not verifiable, that Dale Hill was the Zodiac Killer. And that's just my stance on this. And if anybody wants to talk about this in the comment section, I invite you to put your messages down below. But in other Zodiac Killer news, there was a Zodiac film that was actually in the works that was based on a book by Lyndon Lafferty. And I've said this many times. Lyndon Lafferty was the first person who pulled me into the Zodiac Killer mystery. Of course, I saw the America's Most Wanted special when I was a kid talking about the Zodiac Killer. That's how a lot of us learn about the Zodiac mystery, from my generation anyway. But Lyndon Lafferty appeared on a radio program called The Savage Nation talking about how he had identified the Zodiac Killer, and I was simply thinking, oh, the Zodiac that I saw on the TV as a kid, he's been identified. And I just went over to zodiackiller.com, I read through the profiles, and I began examining the evidence for myself. And it turns out that an individual actually purchased the rights to Lyndon Lafferty's book, which is called The Zodiac Killer Cover-Up, also known as The Silence Badge. And this was done by a British director named Charlie Shackleton, and he was hoping to turn that into a feature film. And this would be exploring William Joseph Grant as a Zodiac Killer suspect. He is sometimes referred to as Andrew Todd Walker. And when Lyndon Lafferty wrote his book, William Joseph Grant was still alive, so we called him George Russell Tucker. And I still have to give credit to Lyndon Lafferty for getting me curious about the Zodiac Killer mystery, but I have a two-part book discussion on the Zodiac Killer cover-up, also known as The Silence Badge, and it might be the worst Zodiac Killer book that I have ever written. If they wanted to make a movie about it, it would have to be done in the terms of just being a drama, maybe inspired by true events, but it would have to be a drama and absolutely not a true story. That book is filled with fictitious additives, and it is actually poorly constructed, in my opinion. Once again, you can hear about it in my two-part book discussion, but there's an article that came out on sfgate.com called The Zodiac Mystery Takes an Absurd Turn. Cheeky new documentary called Zodiac Killer Project won an award at Sundance for innovation. So I'm just going to provide one introductory sentence, because of course I've previewed this article, and that is that this movie will not be coming out. So what Charlie Shackleton decided to do was try to make a documentary based on his attempts to turn Lyndon Lafferty's book into a Zodiac film. As the true crime industry has exploded over the last decade, there's a few things that you can count on in almost every cold case docuseries. At some point, you'll see B-roll of small-town America with a reminder for the viewer that its residents don't lock their doors. And yes, I'm from a small town in West Virginia. We did not lock our doors, ever, growing up. You can expect a black and white photo grid showing the killer's victims and a sort of murder yearbook. And then, of course, some dramatic slow-motion clips of bullet casings bouncing off the floor. The Zodiac Killer Project, it features a new film that premiered at Sundance about the terrifying Bay Area murder spree of the late 60s and 70s, and it has all of these tropes, but they're delivered with a meta-framing that spins the genre on its head. British film director Charlie Shackleton originally aimed to collect an easy paycheck with yet another Zodiac Killer docudrama, securing, he thought, the rights to the Zodiac Killer cover-up, a book written by retired California Highway Patrolman Lyndon E. Lafferty, who claims to have spotted a killer at a rest stop in 1970. After Shackleton had already begun plotting out a made-for-TV film, he traveled to Northern California to scout locations. Lafferty's family backed out of the deal. This left Shackleton, who had storyboarded sequences and hired a crew, with the skeleton of a film, but no source material he could pull from without the risk of litigation. Faced with abandoning the project or finding a creative solution, Shackleton decided that he would carry on with an entirely different type of film, one that skewers the true crime genre he had hoped, and it would make a quick buck. This finished film product is something like a vlog in which Shackleton narrates how he would have made the film while making fun of the visual storytelling cliches that define the genre. Well, I don't really know what you would want to make fun of if you're going to be talking about the Zodiac Killer mystery. And this is one thing that I think the David Fincher film did very well in 2007, because it's not making light of the suffering, it's not making light of the victims, it's actually showing a serious investigation into the process. So if somebody's going to try and find comedic material in this, maybe that's better left unsaid. And I don't really know if I would be enjoying this. I'm definitely going to watch it as soon as I can, Zodiac Killer Project, for the sake of curiosity in regards to all things Zodiac related, but I really don't know if I'm going to enjoy this type of creation. Now, I completely understand that he wanted to make a Zodiac Killer film, and I've openly asked you guys many times on the channel, what do you think would make for a good Zodiac Killer movie? Because we already have the David Fincher film that has the sequences of the events, and it has Robert Graysmith, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, trying to investigate this, and there's more than one way to lose your life to a murder mystery. And we've seen that on film. And there's also the Zodiac Killer from 1971, which tells more or less it's more or less a window into the mind of the Zodiac if he were indeed telling the truth. But with this one, it sounds like, I mean, it doesn't sound like this. This is exactly what they're saying. They wanted to make a video and a documentary and a movie on Lyndon Lafferty's book, The Zodiac Killer Cover-Up, also known as The Silence Badge, which talks about how Lyndon Lafferty had some very bizarre encounters with an individual named William Joseph Grant, and he began investigating him, and then he started thinking that he was the Zodiac Killer. But ultimately, I think that I don't know if I'm going to be, like seeing this on opening day. And this is the true crime equivalent of a Nathan Fielder TV show. Back to the article, a bone-dry examination of audiences' obsessions with grotesque killers, cover-ups, and conspiracy theories. Shackleton's dedication to the bit is extraordinary. For about 90 minutes, he rambles about the lore of the Zodiac Killer as it pertains to Lafferty's theory, while tiptoeing around the details that appear in Lafferty's book, so as not to get sued. By the end, the viewer hasn't learned too much about the actual Zodiac Killer or Lafferty's dogged pursuits of the film, or the solution. The film is mostly musings of a student of the genre who is also a class clown, simultaneously indulging in parodying the tropes of serial killer documentaries. Now, if you want to parody the tropes of serial killer documentaries, there's a way to do that in a very practical approach. There's a way to do that in a very interesting approach. You can highlight about how there are these types of overused mechanisms in serial killer documentaries. I would think that that's very, very engaging, and I would be absolutely approaching that with open eyes and open arms. But when you're just going to have some type of class clown, by S.F. Gates' own description, just making fun of the material, I mean, what's the real benefit to that? But, I guess people have the right to make the type of content that they want. It's a divisive and insufferable, and just brilliant enough to win Sundance's Next Innovator Award. As for distribution, nothing has yet been announced, but in a bit of poetic justice, it's most likely that Shackleton's film will wind up on a streamer presented right alongside a much more serious Zodiac Killer documentary. And I can only expect that that's going to be referring to This Is the Zodiac Speaking, which came out last year, which talked about Arthur Lee Allen and his connection to a family called the Seawaters. And I've talked about that multiple times. I have a direct response to that here on this channel. But does this sound like something that you would like to see? And I guess you've already heard my take on the subject. I think that this is something that is perhaps not going to be my cup of tea, but because it is Zodiac related, I want to know what this guy Charlie Shackleton is going to say about it, even if it might infuriate me a little bit. Next, I would like to give a big thank you to everyone who listened to the recent episode that came out on Black Box Online Radio talking about the book Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards by Jason Hughes. And this explores the possibility of Edward Wayne Edwards being a very prolific serial killer letter writer, and not necessarily being a serial murderer, but a serial killer letter writer. And you can hear that on Black Box Online Radio. That episode was a bonus one that came out last Thursday. And the next thing that I would like to discuss is actually something that I heard on Vincent's channel when he was interviewing Zach M., also known as Zach Wilcox, and he made a bold statement about the Zodiac Killer, because the Zodiac Killer wasn't only a serial killer, he also wrote letters, he created cryptograms, the ciphers, greeting cards, diagrams, and he also made numerous threats. He acted like a terrorist. But the bold statement that I took away from the interview with Zach was that it's almost as if the Zodiac Killer was a wannabe. He just wanted to be something. He was trying to be a brilliant individual. He's trying to be some type of cipher genius. He's trying to be a domestic terrorist. And he just wants to be all of these powerful things. He wants to be all of these strong things. But he is not, because, to be very frank, the Zodiac Killer was somebody who fired gunshots at people in vulnerable places who were more or less defenseless, and then he ran away and he drove away. And, he even tried to downplay this in one of his letters by saying that I did not leave with squealing tires and a roaring engine or whatever it was, and I left slowly and quietly, not to draw attention to myself. The Zodiac Killer was trying to make himself sound tough and strong and cool and calm and collected. Maybe D.B. Cooper could have gotten away with that, but the Zodiac Killer not so much. And I mostly agree with the statement that was shared by Zach on the New Cokes channel. However, I also want to point out that the Zodiac was indeed a real serial killer. That part was not a wannabe anything. That was an instance and an issue where the Zodiac was somebody who was trying to create this type of serial killer persona, but he only knew that people would listen to him in the letters, and people would care about the ciphers and the cryptograms if he did something additionally heinous, and that was committing the murders. And I know Zach is aware of this, and he wasn't trying to put this out there that the Zodiac was not a real serial killer. That's just my take on the subject. The Zodiac was a vicious and, I believe, a sadistic murderer, but some people will challenge beyond that. And one of the sources that I've been going through recently has been what I call the Time Life Collective, giving a shout out to longtime Black Box Online Radio follower Batman66, who shared with me the Time Life articles on the Zodiac Killer, and I've talked to you guys about the Sherry Joe Bates case from 1966 here on this channel, and I also talked to you about the 408 cipher. But I went through their series on the Lake Herman Road murders. On December 20th of 1968, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were attacked in Vallejo, California, and it was actually on unincorporated land between Vallejo and Benicia. And this book, the Time Life Collective, shares the take on the subject that the victims were targeted purely at random. And it's actually proposing that the victim from the Blue Rock Springs shooting, Darlene Ferrin, was a specific target, but David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were targeted at random. And I appeared on Jerome's channel, which is called Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, last year, and I gave my interpretation of the events at the Lake Herman Road murders, and that is that David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen are sitting in a car. David Faraday is in the driver's seat, Betty Lou Jensen is in the passenger seat. Then a suspicious vehicle pulls up near them, and then the killer exits the car, and then he is more or less trying to get them to comply with his demands. Maybe he's firing a warning shot, maybe he's threatening them. I mean, I actually do think he fired a warning shot, and Betty Lou Jensen had flight instincts, and all of this is laid out in the Time Life Collective. Almost everything I said on Mysteries with Mr. Belgique is present here in the Time Life Collective articles. And then Betty Lou Jensen gets the flight instinct, and she goes out the passenger side door. She tells David Faraday to follow her. The Zodiac then walks back around to the passenger side of the car, and then he gets David Faraday almost as soon as he exits the passenger side door. And this is the additional piece of information that I wanted to talk to you guys about. It's almost as if David Faraday could have been intercepted by the Zodiac Killer as he's trying to run away, and the Zodiac put one bullet in David's head. Betty Lou Jensen continues her pursuit of trying to run, and the Zodiac keeps firing bullets, and ultimately she is shot and killed instantly. Even though David Faraday was shot in the head and Betty Lou Jensen was shot multiple times as she was running away, David Faraday actually lived longer than Betty Lou Jensen. Every report that I have read states that she was killed instantly. And one more time, this is from the Time Life Collective, which is a set of sources that I'm going to be exploring more here on Black Box Online Radio for this coming year. And there are going to be a lot of developments with this channel. I've talked to you guys multiple times about how there will be a return of the segment True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning, which will come to you on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the Tuesday episode will be part of the channel membership, which is going to launch very soon. It is the month of February now, and I hope everyone had a wonderful Valentine's Day. There are so many criminal things that I think about, though, with Valentine's, like the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and so on, let alone all of these Lover's Lane-style murderers, such as the Zodiac Killer, perhaps. But in terms of what's going on with Black Box Online Radio, I will be launching the channel membership in March, which will give you access to 3 bonus episodes every week. You'll get the True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning segment on Tuesday, which is a live stream that's interactive, where I talk to you guys about anything under the sun or in the darkness. You can share Zodiac things, you can talk about Jack the Ripper, D.B. Cooper, any subject of your own curiosity. And there will also be the double event, which will be a bonus episode about Jack the Ripper coming out on Wednesdays, and the Cooper Profile, a bonus episode about D.B. Cooper coming out on Fridays. And that's Ripper Wednesday and Cooper Friday, but there will be bonus content that will be made available. And if you join the channel membership, you'll get access to 3 bonus episodes every week. And there will be an absolutely free segment that's coming out on the weekend that is going to talk about the case of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996. A very, very tragic murder. So in addition to hitting the like button and subscribing, you can also join the channel membership and explore some of the content and some of the discussions here on Black Box Online Radio. So I'd like to pick up with something from last week that I was talking to you guys about. and that was the concept of the Old Norse connections to the Zodiac Killer mystery. Because there is a Zodiac Killer letter called the SLA letter, which stands for Symbionese Liberation Army. Sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to say that one. But as far as the Old Norse connections, some people think that the Zodiac Killer might have actually been Norwegian himself. And these would be the people who think that Kjell Kavalle was the Zodiac Killer. He was a Norwegian immigrant to the United States of America. He was born in 1919, so he's one of the older suspects. And he came to the USA when he was 10 years old in roughly 1929 or the late 1920s. And there are actually two articles that are written about the Zodiac Killer on a website called brutenorse.com. And I explored this last week on the channel, one of them. And I will look at the other one, but there's a comment that came into us from Silver Stuff, who's talking about the Norse connections to the SLA letter. Whoever decided that the Zodiac had to be Norse to know the Norse meaning of the word SLA, slay, meaning kill, is dead wrong. In the 8th grade in Detroit, Michigan, I had to study Scandinavian writing from around 800 AD. I had no interest in it, but there it was. It was in an English class. I'm Italian, but in 1965, I knew Norse stuff, not impossible. I'm really quite curious, though, Silver Stuff, until tomorrow 9, if you were reading Beowulf, for example. I mean, that might be something that's not Old Norse, but Anglo-Saxon, if you also encountered that in your English class, because we do explore this in literature, and even in junior high and high school, you're going to be exploring Nordic cultures. You're going to be exploring Old Norse, and it's going to come up. And this is one of the things that I think is so perplexing about the Zodiac Killer mystery for people, is that they just think that the Zodiac must have had to be just this brilliant person to create everything. No, he didn't. He could have had an average American education, and he was just using things from his knowledge pool. Like the Zodiac used the word radians in a letter, so some people are thinking, well, he must have been a mathematician. The Zodiac Killer was talking about the SLA letter, saying SLA, an Old Norse word meaning kill, slay, an Old Norse word meaning kill. Therefore, he was a Norwegian. No, he could have just been an ordinary California resident who was exposed to these things throughout his public school education, which probably wasn't very good. Maybe he had an IQ of like between 115 and 140, and he was able to remember a lot of this stuff. And I do think he had a very retentive memory. I think he was very good at paying attention to things, because I also think the Zodiac Killer was very introverted, and he was also someone who wouldn't have been clouded by a lot of emotional connections. The concept of he is able to focus on things without any strong type of psychological noise. Psychological noise meaning getting distracted by ideas. One point that I mostly stand by, but I mean, of course, I don't know 100%, is I absolutely do not believe the Zodiac Killer had any type of ADD or ADHD. I think he was very focused, only because he talks about so many pieces of literature and comic books and things that are works of art, and it seems like he had the ability to concentrate, and not only concentrate, but also digesting ideas from the world of literature and comic books and the previously mentioned subjects. But the article from brutenorse.com is called Slaves in Valhalla, How Deep Was the Zodiac? And last week on the channel, I read the one called An Old Norse Word Meaning Kill Was the Zodiac Killer into Vikings, which didn't necessarily talk too much about Vikings. Instead, it was talking about the Zodiac Killer's SLA letter from 1974, which is an unconfirmed communication, mind you, but I think that there's a very high chance that it could be authentic. Let's have a look here. Slaves in Valhalla, How Deep Was the Zodiac? If I may allow myself to wade deeper yet into these waters of a speculative insanity, I'm going to pretend that not only is the apparent runic cipher hypothesis completely true, but I will also entertain the notion that the Zodiac Killer was actually a full-fledged Old Norse nerd, probably with academic credentials. Of course, we may have to assume that the Zodiac Killer was playing dumb when he penned the SLA letter for this hypothesis to work. Already off to a bad start. Already, I'm thinking like Silver Stuff and Until Tomorrow 9 when I'm reading this. Well, okay, I mean, there's something that you want to explore. You're thinking the Zodiac was an Old Norse nerd, but you all are making the assumptions from the very beginning. Not only is this person making assumptions, but of course we may have to assume that he was playing dumb when he penned the SLA letter. This person is openly stating that the Zodiac Killer this person's openly stating that they are making assumptions. That's why I'm getting a little bit tongue-tied, because it's just kind of mind-boggling how people throw this stuff around when they're saying, like, well, I don't know this, but I'm going to assume that it's true because it's helpful to my hypothesis that the Zodiac Killer was an Old Norse nerd. And that part there about the runic cipher talks about how the Zodiac Killer may have used runic symbols, again, from Old Norse to create the flying V Zodiac Killer symbol. And no disrespect to BruteNorse.com, they're just sharing their ideas. I just wanted to point out that this is assumptive. It is openly assumptive, and they're bragging about how it's assumptive. Back to the article. In several of his letters, the Zodiac refers to a belief that his victims will become his slaves in the afterlife. Even if I'm not convinced that the Zodiac actually believed this himself, I have to wonder where on earth was he getting this idea from? Continuing down the road with our Norse goose chase, we may have to state that if he had read the 10th century Arab chronicler Ibn Fadlan's account of the Rus on the Volga River, he would have found a vivid description of the chieftain's cremation in great detail. Now we're getting somewhere. The exact ethnicity of the Rus in Ibn Fadlan's description is debated, but it suffices to say that most scholars believe that he was Scandinavian. If the Zodiac was an academic specializing in the Viking Age at the time, he probably wouldn't have doubted it either. Most famous of all is the passage where a slave girl is killed in order to serve the dead chieftain in the afterlife, which is also indicated in the Viking Age burial practices more broadly. It doesn't quite add up if we presume that the Zodiac Killer's belief in otherworldly servitude was governed by his academic rationality. Wow, there are a whole lot of words in that set of sentences right there. What this is talking about is a very famous statement that was used by the Zodiac Killer, where the Zodiac was stating that, he mentioned this in multiple times, that he wanted slaves in paradise. He said that he was going to die and be reborn in paradise, and those whom he had killed would be his slaves. He said this in multiple ciphers. He also talked about this in his other communications, very famously on the Halloween card, with the slaves in paradise intersecting on the letter A. So the Zodiac is definitely talking about this. And I've also stated in the past that I don't think he actually believed it, and BruteNorse.com doesn't believe that the Zodiac actually believed this either, but he talked about it. Okay, so now they're saying that the Zodiac Killer must have been somebody who was a Nordic scholar with academic rationality. Now, I really just think that this is not only getting assumptive, this is going to the nth degree, because when is the Zodiac Killer actually talking about Vikings? When is the Zodiac Killer actually talking about Old Norse literature? He said one word, S-L-A, pronounced slay, means an Old Norse word, Norse word meaning kill. So, I guess this is just something that is somebody's trying to explore a certain possibility that piques their curiosity, and that's it. They don't actually comprehend the substance that is associated with it, and more or less, you'd even have to wonder if a website like BruteNorse.com actually thinks that there is any substance to this. Again, I'm not hating on them. They're sharing their material, which they have the right to. Obviously, it got me interested enough to talk about it, but I'm just not convinced. Back to the article. It doesn't quite add up if we presume that the Zodiac's belief in otherworldly servitude was governed by academic rationality. But let's imagine the Zodiac is a man who knew his comparative sources. If so, he might have come across Leo the Deacon, who was a chronicler employed by the imperial Byzantine court in the second half of the 10th century. Being an eyewitness to some of the many run-ins with the Rus, he called them the Taro-Scythians. Leo mentions a practice of marital suicide among them, through which they believed that they could avoid becoming the killer's slave in the afterlife. And this is a quotation that will follow. This also is said about the Taro-Scythians, that never up until now had they surrendered to the enemy when defeated, but when they lose hope of safety, they drive their swords into their vital parts, and thus kill themselves. And they do this because of the following belief. They say that if they are killed in battle by the enemy, then after their death, and the separation of their souls from their bodies will serve as their slayers in Hades. And the Taro-Scythians dread and servitude and hating to wait upon those who have killed inflict death upon themselves with their own hands. So as you can see, though, there is something there that actually might have some substance. And I was very critical of this article from BruteNorse.com because I thought it was going in a bunch of weird directions. However, this really is one that does seem to have some type of substance. The Zodiac Killer could have been familiar with these things, actually, because this is talking about exactly what the Zodiac Killer said in multiple communications. I mean, you heard this thing about being the slayers in Hades. It wants to free the soul from the body by committing suicide to avoid becoming what? A slave in paradise. And if you kill somebody, then you can have them as your slave in paradise. Maybe. I mean, that part of it, I think, is well constructed, or I think that it's tied together in a very engaging way. But we have to remember the introductory paragraph when this person openly stated that this is all an assumption. And I mean, I don't want to be just someone who is going to be going along with any type of well-worded paragraph and just think that it's perfect. But there's actually a quote here that is talking about Valhalla, and it's a poem that has been translated into English that says, "You shall hunting, wash the feet of every man and kindle fires, bind dogs, herd horses, feed pigs before you go to sleep." I guess it might sound a little bit better in Old Norse. Du skalt hundir hevere mani fotlogida oke funo kiunda hunda binda kesta geta gefas vinum su ior sofa gangir. Okay, that's the Old Norse that has been written out and transcribed. I have no idea how to pronounce that, but I mean, this has been set up like a poem. I guess it's not the best poem that's been that was ever written, but that's something that was created all the same. But the whole concept of, yes, they talked about slaves in the afterlife. Was the Zodiac Killer an academic who followed the Old Norse connections and ideas? I am not convinced of that at all, but this is a reasonable thing to explore, so I'm giving this about a 50-50 rating for BruteNorse.com, but I do thank them for this creation. And right now I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. Anybody can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anyone who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And as you guys heard, Batman66 also provided me with the Time Life Collective set of articles, and he recommended the articles from BruteNorse.com about the Zodiac Killer, and I cannot thank you enough for all of these things. It really helps the channel. Lots of different places to explore, lots of different ideas that are in the world, and I cannot do this alone. And if anybody has anything they want to share with the channel, you can send it to blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, and we can continue these discussions. But thank you to Batman66 once again. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery, thank you as well for your regular and consistent support, and for encouraging me to keep going with Black Box Online Radio and to never stop. And Zodiac Monday will continue until the Zodiac Killer mystery is solved. Let's just say that much for now. And our next one comes to us from CZ Guy. CZ Guy has returned to Black Box Online Radio, and I thank you for becoming a regular and consistent supporter over the last several months, and welcome back, and you are greatly appreciated. Now, there are lots of different Zodiac Killer episodes here on BBOR, and in 2020, 5 years ago, goodness, it's so shocking, I sat down and I read the book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All, which is about Earl Van Best as a Zodiac Killer suspect. And he is one whom I don't talk about very frequently on Black Box Online Radio because I think that Earl Van Best has been eliminated. I do not think he is a credible Zodiac Killer suspect. But the following year, in 2021, I made a set of videos called the Debunked series, where I was talking about Zodiac Killer suspects whom I believe were absolutely not the Zodiac, or at the very least there was an extremely low chance of them being the Zodiac. And those things are still up there, but this might be something that I will work with in the future, like redoing the Debunked series, where it would be called something more like Suspect Investigations as opposed to Debunking. But I received a comment on one of the older Zodiac Debunked episodes that was about Earl Van Best as a Zodiac suspect, and this is from Josh W., who says, actually, his name was Earl Van Best Jr., and it was found in both the 340 and 408 ciphers. That fact alone is undisputable and is easily more than enough evidence to refute your debunking, which was so unbelievably weak that I'm amazed that you actually made and posted this video. This is clickbait in every sense of the word. There is a reason why this video has been on YouTube for 3 years and only has 2,000 views. Well, I don't know if you think what kind of channel you think this is, Josh W., but 2,000 views, that's like gold. No, I absolutely recognize that this isn't going to be one of those channels that is going to just put out one video every 5 weeks and get 1 million views. Some people can do that. Some people can do that. I've always wanted to make like a daily program that I can talk to you guys about true crime with, and I continue. But this video has been on YouTube for over 3 years and only has 2,000 views because this guy has no real evidence to dispute or even begin to challenge Gary Stewart and Susan Mustafa's mountain of tangible evidence laid out in their book. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, but stop clickbaiting people with misleading titles of piss-poor videos that contain no evidence of anything except that you dislike Gary Stewart and Susan Mustafa. Okay, we get it, bro, but how can you expect anyone to take you seriously when you offer nothing to combat the convincing evidence they provide in their book? If I'm coming across as rude, I apologize, but I do not like being clickbaited by someone who puts that in a title about having everyone thinking that you have some history, challenging and refuting claims, with irrefutable proof to back up your claims when you have nothing. And really, nothing is written with all caps and there are 4 exclamation points after it. So we have to say, nothing! This is why I am so abrasive, and I have to be honest, that their argument for the Zodiac Killer's identity is infinitely more convincing than your quote-unquote debunking of it, which couldn't gain traction under any circumstance ever, at least not in reality anyway. This is the weakest attempt to refute anything I've ever seen in my life, and I still can't believe you actually uploaded this. Now, I was criticized a lot for making the debunking series back in 2021 because some people were saying, you're not really debunking all the suspects you're talking about, you're just providing the reasons why you don't think they were the Zodiac. And I said that in the intro to almost every single debunked video. But with the case of Earl Van Best, that is one where I think I actually did. This is why I'm so surprised. Well, let's look at the supporting claims that this individual has provided. The name Earl Van Best can be found in the 340 and the 408 ciphers. That fact alone is undisputable. That's what you think solving a serial killer mystery is about. That's what you think solving a murder mystery is all about. You found someone's name in the 340 and the 408 ciphers. Okay, I'm waiting to hear more. That's the only thing this person provided. Well, here's something that I do think truly debunks Earl Van Best as a Zodiac Killer suspect. Gary Stewart, who wrote the book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All, that talked about his biological father, Earl Van Best, being the Zodiac Killer, was caught falsifying documents on national television. I mean, this was all shared in the FX documentary. They caught him falsifying documents and spreading lies and misinformation about this narrative because he was trying to sell a book. And he was exposed, and absolutely no one really thought too much about that other than you guys who follow the Zodiac Killer mystery closely, but just saying that there is a mountain of evidence in their book. The first 24 chapters of that book have nothing to do with the Zodiac Killer. The majority of that book is really just talking about the story of Earl Van Best, and he was involved with a real-life criminal incident which was called the Ice Cream Romance, where he groomed a 14-year-old girl to be his wife, and she was actually his second wife. And the journalist that reported on that one was actually Paul Avery. And it is my personal belief that Gary Stewart learned about this and learned about the possible Zodiac Killer connection. So then he tried to turn his Ice Cream Romance book into a Zodiac Killer book because he wanted to gain more publicity. He wanted to tell lies to earn money. And he was caught doing so. How is that not debunking enough for you? Where somebody blatantly falsified Earl Van Best's mental health records to make it look like he was at a Tuscadero State Hospital with Arthur Lee Allen when that didn't happen. He was busted. And you're going to say all that stuff about how that's clickbait? Not that episode, sir. You're going to say all this stuff about how you felt deceived by watching my video. I know those things don't have the highest production value back in 2021, but guess what? Earl Van Best was not the Zodiac Killer, and if he was, even if he was, Gary Stewart is still a liar. But I do think that Earl Van Best has mostly been debunked for all intents and purposes. But that's just my take on the subject, and you guys can challenge me about Earl Van Best as a Zodiac Killer suspect in the comments section down below. And the next one that I would like to talk to you guys about is coming to us from Andrew WVA, who sent this in to the email address, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, and he says, something about the Zodiac Killer suspect Richard Gaikowski. I recently read a new Zodiac Killer book titled The Only Time Richard Got Angry with Me, and it's written by James Big Twin. That's his artist name. He graduated from Stanford in the 1980s and also worked on the Chaparral, a student newspaper. James personally knew Richard Gaikowski in the 1990s, and they shared a common interest in art and computers, and he was shocked to discover in 2016 that Richard was a Zodiac Killer suspect online. In his book, James starts on a 125th anniversary book for the Chaparral newspaper, whose staff writers often enjoy playing pranks and jokes on campus. As a side project, James was also looking into Richard as a Zodiac suspect and was shocked to find someone who went by the name Dick Geike and wrote 6 articles for the Stanford Daily in 1971. Geike is spelled Geikie. However, he could not find this person in the entire history of the Stanford Student Archives, and had a deep dive search throughout the USA came up empty as well. However, the articles Dick Geike wrote meshed well with Richard Gaikowski's interests, such as computers, medicine, and free university classes. Free university classes are a wonderful thing. No matter what, free is the way to be. Digging deeper, even deeper, the author looked at an October 31st issue of the Stanford Daily, and James noted that he would have taken any help available at the time for students who were partying. He also noticed a few oddities about this particular issue. On page 4, there is a review of the Lamplighters' performance of The Mikado, a play frequently referenced by the Zodiac Killer, and this was the Mikado in San Francisco. At the top of the page, there was a review of a music album called Electric Zodiac. However, the top left album photo is missing the word electric, so it only says Zodiac. In addition to the missing word, there are also a series of odd marks and splotches that were created during the process. James theorizes that Richard may have been helping put this together, and this issue of the paper was created and intentionally inserted these marks and also faded out the word electric. So, I really do have to thank Andrew WVA for sharing this with me. And one more time, this new book is called The Only Time Richard Got Angry with Me by James Big Twin. Now, can I just say, if Richard Gaikowski was not the Zodiac Killer, that man had the absolute worst luck of any human being in the world. There are more Zodiac coincidences around Richard Gaikowski than absolutely any other person on the face of the earth in all history and in all dimensions throughout the space-time continuum. If he was not, this is just absolutely shocking. And Andrew knows I've been somewhat critical of Geik as a Zodiac suspect. That's one of the reasons why I started making Zodiac Killer uploads on YouTube. But this is definitely one that I'm going to have to explore more and explore with an open mind for future Zodiac Mondays. And that is all for me now. Thank you so much for listening to this week's Zodiac Killer News Report. My name is Black Box Ned, and I appreciate everybody who emailed the show and shared stuff with me and left comments down below. I could not do this without you because you guys provide a lot of the ideas that we can bounce off the wall and share. And this is a very interactive program, and all of you listeners are 100% amazing. Thank you once again, and please feel free to check out the channel membership in March and look out for a lot of new things here on Black Box Online Radio. You guys know where to write the show, but you can also get me on Facebook. I have my personal Facebook name, Ned DeHaan, but there's also a Black Box Online Radio Facebook page, which I'm going to be using more. And there is always Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram and TikTok. And for now, goodbye.